Now, one thing, you have a theory about the moon, and we expect to be able to get observable facts about the moon fairly soon. What is your theory?
Well, it is by now rather more than a theory. 10 or 11 years ago, I stated to various scientists that the moon is not a piece of rock, but it is a plasma phenomena, cosmic plasma.
Like most that speak out, Foster was most likely controlled opposition. Notice that he says it is possible to land on other planets, but not the moon. It is likely that it was his task to introduce a half-truth, that the moon is a plasma phenomenon, only for his claims to be, quote, debunked and proved wrong, unquote, a few years later, after they staged the moon landings. Since Foster's claim, however, our own access to technology in recent years has allowed us to investigate the moon in more detail. And through this we see over and over again varying instances of the moon behaving in a way that debunks a lie that it is a ball of rock. We see with our own eyes a semi-transparent moon, either at night or while there is still daylight. We see the sky through the moon. Sometimes it is even possible to see stars directly through the moon. Many have repeatedly demonstrated that moonlight is colder than the shade at night, and therefore it cannot be reflected sunlight as it possesses no residual warmth. We also know that spherical objects do not reflect light. By the laws of reflection, the light concentrates into a highlight point and does not reflect. You can also see frequent crescent moons when both the moon and the sun are within close proximity of each other, meaning that it is impossible for the sun to be casting the Earth's shadow onto the moon. So if the moon is a plasma phenomenon, then how could this be formed in the first place? It is in the appropriation and demonization of the symbol of the swastika that we find some very interesting insights. The existence of a vast amount of historical literature and symbolism suggestive of a vortex opening in the center of our world is too prevalent to be coincidental. We have looked at much of this before, but strangely enough, in the years preceding and during the complete demonization and eradication of the swastika's association with the vortex, we find some additional information regarding the central vortex that is astonishing. In addition to the appropriation of the swastika as their emblem, the Nazis were also obsessed with a very similar symbol, that of the Black Sun. Prior to the rise of the Nazi regime, there existed an occult secret society within Germany called the Thule Society, sometimes alternatively pronounced Thule, that had sub-factions within it. One of these sub-societies, we are told, was the Black Sun Society. Influenced by the Rosicrucians and other Hermetic groups, the Thule Society placed special emphasis on the superiority of an alleged Aryan race with innate mystical powers. The Thule Society derived its name from a mythical northern country in Greek legend. Thule was supposedly a land located furthest north. Others have called it Hyperborea. The Thule Society believed, we are told, that an elder race, the Aryans, colonized our Earth, and they were located within the center of our hollow Earth. Admiral Byrd, the military Antarctic explorer, also made reference to a hollow Earth with an entrance at the North Pole. The Thule Society also believed that the Black Sun was a big ball of primer materia that existed in the center of the Earth and emanated radiation in the form of Vril energy. This energy has many names. Some have called it Chi, astral light, odic forces, or orgone. In 1933, the main architect of the event known as the Holocaust, Heinrich Himmler, acquired Wewelsburg Castle, a wonderful piece of old world infrastructure and technology. He supposedly remodeled the castle, and in doing so imprinted the symbol of the Black Sun into the marble floor of what came to be known as the General's Hall. Much of what has surfaced regarding the German secret societies before and during the Nazi regime is deliberate misinformation, carefully controlled with the sole intention of distraction and demonization. The misinformation regarding these societies has served to further fuel the UFO and alien agenda, which many, such as Jordan Safer, David Wilcock and Corey Goode, have since latched onto and promoted. They are part of a controlled opposition agenda. They are liars. The sole intention of disclosing information regarding German secret societies was to yoke together a ridiculous concept of a superior alien Aryan race existing within our world's northern core, or opening at the center, with maniacal dictatorship that resulted in gruesome genocide, or in other words, to make them seem crazier than they already were. The controllers of our realm had to appropriate the swastika and eradicate its symbolic association with the Earth's central electromagnetic and physical vortex. And while I do not think there exists a black sun underneath us, if the notion of this seems absurd and far-fetched, just remember that the majority of the world's population have already accepted that there is some kind of dark sphere beneath them, acting as a source of our world's electromagnetic energy. Heliocentrism has convinced so many that inside their little blue ball hoax, there exists a spherical core of solid iron at a temperature of over 5,000 degrees. Their own black sun. Interestingly, they never represent this iron core with the metal's usual black or dark grey colour associations in their illustrations, despite telling us it is a crystalline sphere of solid iron. Surrounding the iron's solid core is an outer layer of molten iron, and it is because of this hot liquid iron, we are told, that the Earth has a magnetic toroidal field. And millions have accepted this, and these silly diagrams that resemble Satsumas, despite the hard fact that the furthest depth a human has ever drilled into the Earth is a mere 8 miles. The heliocentric model has to acknowledge an inner core energy source because it is in fact a reality, and our world cannot exist without it. It is likely that the notion of a black sun beneath us is more distraction, although it is not as absurd as the heliocentric Satsuma model. We will return to this later. What is important now, however, is that not only have we another instance of the concept of a black core at the center of our realm, and another reference to a central vortex and opening, but we also have reference to energy, or what the Thule Society called Vril, radiating out of this opening. And if this is truly the case, then we have a theoretical model in which both the formation of the sun and moon makes complete sense. What I am going to try and convey now is complex, and I will do my best, but I need you first of all to forget every model of our Earth you have become familiar with. Things may not make sense at first, but by the end it will. Let's start with the realm and the firmament, and then a central opening. And now let's incorporate our known world, as outlined on the moon by Sturgios. And finally, let's add the source, or electromagnetic coil beneath. Whether a magnetic rock or an electromagnetic coil, the source of our world's magnetic field is located at the center and beneath, and any source of intense electromagnetism would produce strong radiation. No one can say indefinitely, but it is highly likely that the concentrated plasma that we call the moon is a result of a unique form of radiation, similar to X-rays, that emanate from this source via an opening or vortex. X-rays, or very strong radiation beams, would, by the laws of physics, emanate from this central vortex in diverging straight lines. Like X-rays, they would also be invisible. The divergent beams would continue up until coming into contact with the firmament itself. X-ray beams differ from light beams and do not tend to reflect. X-rays are like a super powerful form of light, and because their wavelengths are shorter than ordinary light's wavelengths, it means their frequency is much higher. Because of this, X-rays can travel through objects that ordinary light cannot, and it means that X-rays are not reflected easily. There are not many materials that reflect, scatter, refract, or redirect X-rays. And while I'm not strictly saying that X-rays are the cause, any form of strong radiation beams would behave similarly. There do exist some materials that can reflect high energy rays, and it was a man named Lawrence Bragg in 1913 that discovered that crystalline structures reflect X-rays. That's right, crystalline structures, a crystalline firmament. Bragg reflection is used, for example, to focus monochromatic light, and there is a device called a monochromator that uses curved crystal mirrors to reflect X-rays to focus monochromatic light. Standard monochromators use a prism to break down the light. This is a very familiar image, and Wikipedia displays it for everyone to see. It is now associated with an infamous music album. What is the title of that album? Huh, they are telling us. This means we're right on track. Radiation beams reflected off of the crystal firmament would likely be redirected down, off-center, and into the ionosphere above our heads. The same ionosphere in which the ethereal electromagnetic energy was harvested from. It is here that the beams will converge and concentrate and generate the plasma phenomenon we call the moon. The idea of electromagnetic rays reflecting from the firmament and converging in the ionosphere may seem preposterous, but there are many homemade experiments you can conduct yourself to prove the power of concentrating light rays. As seen here, the rays of the sun reflected in the concave mirror are able to produce intense heat and start a fire. The reflected light rays focus into a point to generate energy. And remember, radiation beams akin to X-rays are much more powerful than light rays. If the moon is a point of focused, condensed plasma, then it has to occur within one of the layers in the ionosphere above us. All the various inert noble gases in our ionosphere appear at differing layers and altitudes. We looked at how these are charged by the sun's electromagnetism to form the plasma sky. At a certain altitude in the ionosphere, there are two layers of neon and helium gas. It is likely that the sun forms in a similar fashion within these layers. After all, helium is linguistically very similar to Helios. It is likely, however, that the moon is formed at the level of altitude in which the gas krypton is present. Krypton is known for its phosphorescent white light. It is also used to create non-thermal or cold plasma, as demonstrated by contemporary scientists developing this field today. The primary reason that the moon's light is cold and not hot like the sun's is not known, but it is likely due to a polarity produced by their interaction with our electromagnetic field in the ionosphere, the moon being the dielectric negative polarity to the sun's positive charge. The craters seen on the moon are likely from the generation of this plasma. Perhaps it is some kind of plasma emulsion that displays a kind of outgassing or bubbling, much like we see with urethane paint defects. Recently, bizarre theories have emerged that we live within one of these craters on the moon. This is not correct. The moon is some kind of phosphorescent, concentrated plasma and not a solid object. You can see the formation of this plasma and its craters right here. It is not solid, it is a light. And this is great because we have a very realistic and working model as to how the moon is formed. What we don't have, however, is an explanation as to how the composite image on its face is formed. As I said before, the image we are seeing on the moon is akin to a composite X-ray photograph of our greater realm. And it is not an active reflection, but rather a historical moment captured in time. And of course, no one knows how it is formed other than those in high places. The moon is a paradoxical phenomenon, at once a volatile luminary of plasma that waxes and wanes in its luminosity, and also a steadfast image captured at some point in time that does not seem to change. We only ever see this image on the moon, and it never changes. This strange and mysterious image that has puzzled and inspired millions could be a result of a natural, organic phenomenon, or perhaps even artificial. Again, only the controllers know. The word photo originates from the Greek photos. It means light. Hence we have words such as photosynthesis, which means the synthesis of light, in which plants harvest light energy and convert it into chemical energy. A photon is the quantum of the electromagnetic field, including electromagnetic radiation, such as light. A huge misconception is the notion that photographic imaging is not a natural, organic phenomenon. This is not correct. The word photograph means light drawing. The concept of natural light-sensitive material is well understood. Our bodies begin to darken when exposed to too much sunlight. Depending on the exposure to the UV, our bodies can develop tan lines. The light literally draws on us. Certain textures and textiles can fade or come to the surface when exposed to light. And there exist natural camera obscuras. A natural camera obscura occurs when a darkened space with a hole permits light rays to enter from outside the space, resulting in a projected image of the space outside inside the darkened area. We can even see projected images of a solar eclipse here on the ground underneath a leaf canopy due to the holes in the leaves. Natural camera obscura was, of course, the inspiration for the early development of photographic technology. Interestingly, the noble gas krypton, the same gas present in our ionosphere, has been used for years, we are told, as an integral component in camera flashes for high-speed photography. It is also an essential component in hyperpolarized MRI scanners. There is also a possibility that the face of the moon is not a natural phenomenon, but was a result of an experiment. Photographic and X-ray films are created through a fusion of a gelatin emulsion with microscopic silver crystals. Because of this, exposure to light is able to capture an invisible latent image.
Magnetic field of the Earth is not a straight line, but it's curved. And so charged particles can spiral around the magnetic field and follow the magnetic field lines, and they come down on Earth where the magnetic field lines enter, which is near the magnetic poles. The sun emits a plasma. Plasma is highly ionized, electrons and protons. We call that the solar wind. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak. And when it reaches the Earth, it ionizes the upper atmosphere of the Earth, and then it produces light. The light is very faint, can only be seen at night, and that light is called aurora. And we here call it northern light, but I'm sure that people in the southern hemisphere, they call it southern light. When the sun is very active, it can be breathtaking, really absolutely fabulous. The aurora can change very fast on timescales of seconds to minutes. And it is of course strongest near the magnetic poles, and so you rarely ever see it in Boston. It can have very bright colors. Red, green, white is the most common. And the color that you will see depends on the energy of the charged particles as they come in, but also depends on whether the nitrogen molecules in the atmosphere or the oxygen molecules are being excited. Also depends on at what height in the atmosphere the ionization occurs. I've seen it quite a few times in my life. I did hiking in the Adirondack where I saw it. I've seen it from Calgary in Canada. But whenever I fly to Europe, the flights are always at night, I always ask for a window seat on the left side of the plane. And that's the reason, so that I can look to the north, and a few times have I seen spectacular aurora from the plane. I want to show you some slides. If you visit the 802 website, I made some links for you to some fabulous slides of aurora. But now I want to show you a few that I have here. Can I have the first slide? This is white aurora, like a nice curtain. Not so uncommon, can change on timescales of minutes to seconds. As I said, you can only see it at night. It's very faint. The next slide, you see another remarkable example of aurora, white aurora. Strange shapes, very unpredictable, and the moving, it's like looking at a movie when you actually see aurora. The next one is red aurora, a wonderful curtain coming down. For reasons that are not so easy to understand, maximum light comes from a ring which has a radius of about 500 kilometers from the magnetic pole. And the next slide shows you a picture taken from a satellite, which is 3 Earth radii away from the Earth. This is taken in ultraviolet light, and you see beautiful this ring. So this radius is roughly 500 kilometers. And here is one of the magnetic poles. I don't know whether it's the North Pole or the South Magnetic Pole. And the next slide shows you something similar. If you look only at these four, they are taken 12 minutes apart, again in UV, and you see here a crossbar. I don't know how to explain that crossbar. It's called theta aurora. Obviously why it's theta goes without saying, right? Amazing. And this is these are 12 minutes apart, so that gives you also an idea of how fast this can change. Here it's very dark and here it's very bright. So the changes are quite dramatic.
Comparing Ophiuchus's belt and the Bear constellation by the Pole Star, or what is known as Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper, at first provides no insight as to what Falconelli is referring to. Is this just a rambling of an insane, cryptic mason, or are we missing something? But if you begin to trace the pattern on the belt, then another hidden and familiar pattern begins to emerge within the pattern itself. When documented throughout the year, at each season, the Big Dipper constellation also forms this pattern, the symbol of the swastika. A now infamous symbol of evil. What many do not know is that according to the official narrative, the swastika was one of the most widely used symbols throughout history and different cultures. It is an important symbol in Asian countries, representing Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. It was used by the so-called ancient Greeks and Romans, the Druids, the Celts, Native Americans, early Christians, and so on. We see it in mosaics, rock churches, bracelets, rose windows, crosses, pottery, clothing, and flags. We see it everywhere throughout time and culture. Interestingly, Swedish and Norwegian power companies used the symbol in the late 1800s and early 1900s to represent electric power stations and hydroelectric stations. This connection cannot be purely coincidental. The task of erasing memory and history is not an easy feat. It takes time. Out of all the symbols, this is the one that the enemy had to corrupt and dilute the most by appropriation. Not just because of its now lost association with electromagnetism, but because, as Falconelli let slip, its original association with Mercury's involvement in the old world's power grid. Like the Caduceus's spiraling snakes, it depicts a vortex that Mercury produces in the presence of electromagnetism. The swastika is the vortex. It also represents another vortex, the one below Polaris and the Big Dipper, at the center. The same vortex that NASA has teased hiding in plain sight here on Earth and in their representation of other planets' poles. It is the same vortex that Mercator and others documented in maps and writing, the whirlpool surrounding Rupes Nigra and located at the North Pole. Interestingly, scientists have recently discovered large natural stores of the so-called toxin Mercury at the North Pole. They are worried about it melting and causing toxicity. Of course they are. As Kevin Schaefer writes in the National Geographic article, it turns out that not only is there mercury in permafrost, but the Arctic is also the biggest pool of mercury on the planet. Is this another mocking on their behalf, or is there actually a vast amount of mercury at the north? We will return to this much later in our journey. The noble metals and their original location on Earth are very important, and it is the scriptures that hold the answer. The old world knew. They knew the Earth they walked upon better than anyone else. They knew the alchemical metals, gold, iron, copper, mercury, and so on, could be fused in ways that allowed them to access the ethereal electromagnetic energy. They knew that Ophiuchus, the alchemical mercury, could elevate the Christ, the alchemical gold, and carry him to the masses. It is not a coincidence that the path Ophiuchus carried Christ was across the river, across water. The legend of Ophiuchus is a symbolic and metaphoric totality of the old world's energy system. You have a question, and I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. You want to ask about the maps, Mercator and such. If they have fabricated history, distorted so much symbolic meaning, and lied about those that came before, how can we trust these old maps and accounts of the North? How do we know that Hyperborea is a real place, and that there is a vortex in the center? That's the spirit, an important question.
A light at the end of the tunnel. We end as we began, with a map. You've been so busy focusing on Antarctica and all the lies of the satanic cabal that you forgot to examine the location that brought you here in the first place. The North Pole at the center of Gleason's map and the flat plane we call Earth. Gerardus Mercator was a Flemish geographer and cartographer and is responsible for the Mercator projection for navigation, in which north is up and south is down. It is pretty much the same map we refer to today as the standard map of Earth. A year after his death, in 1595, Mercator's family compiled his life's work into an atlas, which contained his earlier works. Here is one of his atlases, produced in 1569. The map's polar extremities of north and south are represented by huge bodies of land. In panel 13, a more detailed look of the North Pole or the Arctic is provided. It shows a quasi-circular body of land at the North Pole, separated into 4 quadrant continents, with what appears to be an island in the middle. Mercator's 1595 world map presents this Arctic region in more detail. The body of land or rock in the center of these 4 quadrant continents here is called Rupes Nigra, which translates to Black Rock. The official historians of the world tell us that Mercator's vision and influence came from the text Inventio Fortunata, a conveniently lost book containing a description of the North Pole as a mountain surrounded by a giant whirlpool and 4 continents with 4 directional rivers. Historians date the book to being created in the late 14th century and tell us that no pages or extracts of the lost book have ever been discovered. There are a vast amount of maps from this era, from all different cultures, that depict the North Pole in a similar way. It is not until the 17th century that reference to the North Pole's mountain, 4 continents, and 4 directional rivers starts to disappear from cartography, like a Photoshop erasure job. This coincides and aligns with the rise of Galileo, the father of heliocentrism. They tell us there is no land at the North Pole, just a large ice sheet. Google Earth, however, refuses to even give us the ice sheets. They love to show us their thwarted version of Antarctica, but when venturing north, all that remains is Greenland. Look at Greenland here. Edges of real land before a huge mass of white engulfs the entire country. This does not look real. They claim that Google Earth works by superimposing satellite images, aerial photography, and GIS data onto a 3D globe. That's great. So where are the perpetual ice sheets at the Arctic Sea? A closer look at the North Pole here is very telling. Zooming into this little island, something interesting appears. A glitch in the matrix. A line that runs from this island to the center of the Arctic Sea. Deliberate mocking on their part, or just amateur NASA-style Photoshop skills. Either way, it indicates that the vast nothingness of blue ocean here is indeed a photoshopped lie, and exists primarily to hide whatever is really here. Perhaps Mercator and the early cartographers just got it wrong. Mercator was no joke in his day. His maps were not merely fantastical creations of the world as he dreamed up and saw fit. He was known for his meticulous accuracy and, as stated earlier, he later developed the Mercator projection, which is still used today for navigation. The Invencio Fortunata is lost and has never been found in its entirety or extract. But an old letter from Mercator to John Dee, the advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, provides insight. John Dee wrote to Mercator to inquire about the North Pole. In his reply, Mercator paraphrased the Invencio Fortunata and provided a description of the region. In the midst of the four countries is a whirlpool, into which there empty these four indrawing seas, which divide the north, and the water rushes round and descends into the earth just as if one were pouring it through a filter funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on every side of the pole. That is to say, 8 degrees altogether, except that right under the pole there lies a bare rock in the midst of the sea. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it is all of magnetic stone, and is as high as the clouds. It is black and glistening. In Johann Ruysch's 1508 map, the North Pole is represented in a similar manner, and the map's legend states, it is written in the Book of the Fortunata, under the Arctic Pole there is a high magnetic rock, 33 German miles in circumference. A surging sea surrounds this rock as if the water were discharged downward from a vase through an opening to 4 mouths below. Around are islands, of which 2 are inhabited. Here the ship's compass loses its property and no vessel with iron on board is able to get away. A magnetic rock or mountain at the center, at the North Pole, with the northern star Polaris fixed right above, unchanging, while the rest of the stars and constellations in the firmament revolve around it. Could the source of all magnetism and electromagnetism on Earth emanate from this magnetic mountain? It is an undisputable fact that compasses point north. But the satanic cabal tell us that the Earth is a spinning globe with two magnetic poles, the north and the south. Yet no matter how far we go south, the compass's needle never shifts and begins pointing south. It always points north. Is the north's magnetic pole just stronger than the south's and able to overpower it no matter how south you go? Or is somebody lying? And what about this whirlpool? The vortex at the center? Do the oceans really collect through four rivers and descend into the earth itself like a funnel or a vase? Would that even be possible? Do you remember what happened to water in the bowl with the magnet? Water is diamagnetic. It would certainly resist a large magnetic mountain. Is the North Pole really Earth's very own rabbit hole? And again, if this were true, why lie? It's entirely possible to let people know about this mountain and whirlpool and make it compatible with their satanic heliocentric model. The rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than you realize. It's hard to imagine a bigger secret than flat Earth itself, the firmament, the giant trees and quarried land. But there is one. It could very well perhaps be the most satanic lie of them all, just perhaps. As always, the clues are hiding in plain sight, in the symbolism, in the mythology, the language, the metaphors, the movies, waiting patiently to be discovered. If we were to take them at their word and believe.
So you spin, when you spin pizza dough, it kind of flattens out. Yeah. It gets wider in the middle. And so Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning. And it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere. It's oblate. And officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. But not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator.
A little chubbier.
Yeah. Chubby's a good way. It's like pear-shaped.
At the beginning of the video he shows a CD or a disc. He immediately draws the geometric shape of an oblate spheroid. We can see how he separates the oblate spheroid with a disc that has a hole in the center. Then, below he draws a circle with a swastika inside and immediately paints it completely black. From this black circle rays come out and 3 rays pass through the hole in the center. Below he writes, "Still, one of the possible meanings of this black circle may be the black sun." He draws reliefs on the edge of the hole and writes North Pole. And above this hole inside what would be the celestial vault he draws a star, the polar star or Polaris. He marks 2 points and connects them in a circle and writes equator. He draws 2 lines that go down from the polar star to the 2 points. The lines form a triangle. He highlights 2 of the rays coming out of the black sun and also forms a triangle, but vice versa. And he writes, "As above so below." It's one of the 7 principles of Hermes Trismegistus. It appears on the Emerald Tablet and then in the Kybalion. He erases the intersections and draws the sun and moon. And he makes a gesture of rotation. He draws 2 arrows to show the distance of the moon and the sun. Both are 3,300 miles or 5,310 kilometers away. Then he measures the diameter of the sun and moon, being the same with a diameter of 32 miles or 51 kilometers. He draws continents on the surface and on the other side as well. He points both sides and writes, "Same." Below he writes Summer Land. He draws rays coming out of the black sun and writes, "Northern Lights." The center of the drawing is equal to the Mason symbol, which is a square and a compass. He points out the ray coming out of the black sun toward the moon, and then he erases the face of the moon. He makes signs explaining that the sun doesn't light up the moon. Who does it is the black sun. He immediately draws the geometric shape of an oblate spheroid.
So it's not actually a sphere. It's an oblate. And officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. It's oblate.
to facing secret places, feel the chill, nightfall covers me, but you know the plans I'm making still overseas. Could it be the whole earth opening wide? A sacred wine, a mystery gaping inside. Things are not always as they seem. We got a special version of a song about this place we share together. Let's be hearing ya!
Meeting you